you must not overinterpret what I say that has a political sort of leaning to it, because there is a risk that you might overinterpret what I say in terms of its politics and underinterpret what I say in terms of its religion. Because I'm mostly interested in the religious aspect, the sort of Christian ideology in all of this, and less so in the politics, even though that cannot be completely separated. So I'm fearful that we're underinterpreting the religious part and overinterpreting the political aspect. So this kind of topic, the kind of Adventism that brought me into life, has a lot to do with the kinds of topics that we're doing here. These four sessions on the cosmic conflict and contemporary realities, and I just sat down this morning thinking that it was 5 years ago that one of my first mentors in biblical areas, he died. He was only 69 when he died 5 years ago, and I just miss him, because I miss having that kind of conversation with people, and I'm grateful to you for seeming to be interested in this topic and allowing us to have that kind of conversation that I have thought was so meaningful. So I'm going to show you a picture of my mentor next time. Looking back at the topic we did last time, I would again not asking from you to agree with anything I said that had political ramifications, but just a framework, just to see if one can have a certain credibility in terms of the framework, and that is that there is something to be said on the subject of economics. And the church has historically been insensitive to the plight of the poor and preferential to the interests of the rich. Evangelical Christians and the American political system favor the wealthy at the expense of the poor. I contended that need not be completely agreed on, but it seems to me that there is a ideological and even theological tendency in the U.S. that seems quite similar to what we've had in the church historically. And then I also said last time that the Sabbath in its original intent and eschatological role is not only a contest for another day, but for a different ideology. So there is a Sabbatarian sort of thinking there, to the extent that you might say there is going to be what I call a confrontation of signs at the end of history, Sabbath and something else. Then that cannot only be a confrontation of days, it has to be a confrontation of different ideologies, different ways of different priorities. And it seems to me that the Sabbath, the ideology of the Sabbath, as I proposed last time, is an ideology that looks out for the interests of the poor. The interests of the Sabbath are the interests of the poor. The enemies of the Sabbath are the enemies of the poor. I quoted someone to that effect. You might want to weigh in on this one before we go to today's topic, because we didn't get much to discuss it. So I would, but I'm sort of hopeful that you don't want to discuss it. Yes.
When Ralph Reed was directing the campaign for George Bush in Texas, in his run in Texas, one of the platform things said that all welfare should be given to the church, and there should be a 10% tax, and Social Security should be dispensed. And the Texas people voted for it. However, when it got to the national platform, of course that didn't make it. But in Texas it did make it. And so you have this kind of ignoring of the poor and the wealthy platform.
Well, you need not be uncertain about where the church has placed itself historically, and the rise of socialist, communist ideology was partly because had a lot to do with that the poor had been disenfranchised. That like Marxist ideology said that religion had become an opium for the masses, meaning that what did society offer the poor? It offered them religion. It did not offer, any sort of redress in terms of living condition. The church there would be certainly the Roman Church, but it would also, to some extent, be. You could also say that there is I'd say that Protestantism has in some ways lifted or changed the framework for the poor. John Wesley, for example, did a lot to improve the lot of the poor. Methodism was very much invested in that. Well, that's important. That's an important point, that there has been involvement to improve the lot of the poor through missions. I think that's true. And I don't think that my claims for the types of societies we have structured, Christianly structured, should negate that there has been missions that have actually helped the poor quite a lot. In Peru, for example, even Adventist missions has been demonstrably effective in helping sort of balance the inequities between the rich and the poor. So it needs to be nuanced. So I'm focusing this in somewhat narrowly. I'm focusing it historically on 1,500 years or so of Christian history, and then to see where are the gravitational forces now in contemporary Christianity, and especially with an eye to America. The Sabbath initially is given, or the Sabbath not necessarily initially, but when the Israelites leave Egypt, they come from slavery, and this is a 24/7 society. So the Sabbath offered to them is a gift to the poor, because they are all poor, they're all destitute, they're all enslaved. They're the workers. They are the Mexicans of their day in that society, and God delivers them and gives them the Sabbath, and then He structures the Sabbath in a kind of anti-capitalist way, because those who gathered much did not have excess, and those who gathered little have no lack. There is an attenuation of the relationship between effort and output in the initial configuration of the Sabbath. So there must be something, the Sabbath, the intent of the Sabbath, giving sort of mercy to those who are just working and toiling and wondering if they can make ends meet. That mercy factor is there in the Sabbath, and then there is an attenuation of that very predictable, that trusted relationship between effort and output, which I think is conspicuous. And then you have the sabbatical year, where you have rest for the land, and you have the Jubilee, where ownership, where you cannot concentrate ownership of land, because it is reset every 50 years. There will be redistribution of land. Which is another big and central tenet of a sort of runaway capitalist ideology, that you can own as much as you want to, whatever happens to those at the bottom of the ladder. But the topic today is not the Sabbath. I just wish to say that I think that there is an economic aspect of the Sabbath. Let's say that we tend to think in the Adventist community, we tend to say, well, the Sabbath is, being obedient. It is to show who is obedient to this commandment. But the Sabbath was not primarily configured for the subject of obedience. It was primarily configured for the needs of the poor. It was configured to a need, to a real need, and that is something that we as middle class people might not sense. What is yes, of course, we think we need it too, but the aspect of need is not conspicuous in our situation. Yes. Well, that's right. But the Sabbath, so the Sabbath of creation, what is the need there? What's the need there? Because human beings come to the Sabbath and we have not worked. There is not that kind of need there. The need, the need there is probably best seen as a need on the part of God, wishing to commit himself, wishing to commit to what God has created. So. And there is also then a sense that humans also need it, that we need to reciprocate. The text in Genesis does not say that anyone should keep the Sabbath. It only says that God kept it. It is totally a sort of narrated structure. So, but then the Sabbath gets its ideology gets developed. Its ideology is spelt out for other types of realities, and in the Gospel of John, which I think is the most important Sabbath text in the entire Bible. I have just finalized an article for the Adventist Review that they have said they liked, that will come out in July on that subject, on the Sabbath in the Gospel of John. In the Gospel of John, the ideology of the Sabbath is not divine rest, but divine work. My Father is working until now, and I am also working. So the Sabbath is constantly being configured, being sort of updated according to human need. And that, I think, it must not be taken out of the equation. The topic today in a series of reacceptances: number 1, reacceptance of the church as state; number 2, reacceptance of extreme economic inequities; number 3 then is reacceptance of unaccountable authority. That's the subject today. And next time I'd like us to talk about reacceptance of the mother. So the biblical perspective for today's topic, I wish we could talk about this text. I thought to myself this morning, I would worship Jesus if he had only said this. That would be enough for me. I would just fall on my knees and worship him all out for saying this thing only. Jesus answered. He's talking to those who are interrogating him. Jesus answered to the priestly interrogators, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in the synagogues and in the temple, where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. What's that? That's how accountable people do things. Transparently, openly. I have said what in secret? Nothing. In secret, I have said nothing. So there is, because if you're going to have accountability, you have to have what? Transparency. You do not have accountability where you do not have transparency. And Jesus and God, because Jesus is merely reading from the script of the Old Testament here. This is God speaking in Isaiah 48:16, and you will find other texts like it. From the beginning I have not spoken in secret. From the time it came to be, I have been there. That's a kind of weak translation, but you get the idea. So, and you'd find other texts like it, and you should avail yourself of a Bible study program that has good cross-references, where you can easily see other texts like it. A program like the one I have Bible Works, but there are simpler programs than that will do the same thing. Now, let me say that again. I could worship God for this reason only, and would need nothing else but that, to say that the divine authority, the Jesus authority, presents itself before the world, transparent, and inviting with its transparency accountability. See what I'm saying? You're not awed. You don't want to go home now and meditate on that and do nothing else for the rest of the day. I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in the synagogues, in the temple, where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. I mean, what more can you ask for? And there is more, of course, texts that you have loved in this community. Servants. I no longer call you servants, I call you friends. But that's part of the same ideology. It's a part of the same, this is whole cloth, this kind of ideology on the part of Jesus. That's our biblical perspective for today's topic. Moving into historical realities, we see that Christian authority, the way the Christian state authority constitutes itself, and the way the church authority constitutes itself, is not quite like that. So here is W.H.C. Friend, who has written a wonderful book on the rise of Christianity, a big book, a really thick book, but it's a very nice read. He says about the Constantinian Christianity, there could be only one orthodoxy. The ministers of the supreme God would speak with one voice only. In practice, the ancient world had exchanged the guardianship of one set of divine masters. Notice the Roman emperors, who appointed them? Who appointed the Roman emperors? God. They were emperors by divine right, because emperors are not appointed from below. They are appointed from above. They have a mandate from above. So the ancient world had exchanged the guardianship of one set of divine masters, meaning the emperor, capricious but generally benevolent, for another that would brook no opposition. So how does imperial authority configure itself in the post-Constantinian era? More lenient, more sort of forgiving, more sort of magnanimous than the Roman emperors? Not according to Friend. It's less so. It's less because the old masters, they were capricious but generally benevolent. But the new ones, they want to get into your bedroom, literally speaking. I'm sorry, but they are much more intrusive in matters of personal belief and conduct and so on. Lord Acton, whose book I have recommended a number of times now, in his book, Essays on Freedom and Power, he says that, and he is writing as a Catholic historian. Friend is writing more, I suppose, from a Protestant perspective. Constantine, in adopting their faith, the Christian faith, intended neither to abandon his predecessor's scheme of policy, nor to renounce the fascinations of arbitrary authority, but to strengthen his throne with the support of a religion which had astonished the world by its power of resistance. And I have shown you that pillar before, haven't I? You've seen that pillar before in Istanbul? If you go to Istanbul again, you need to see it. It is an amazing pillar. It's much shorter than it was initially, but this pillar was there when Constantine opened up his city and dedicated it in 331 AD, I think it was. Then he had a statue of himself, a huge statue of himself on the top of the pillar. But Constantine there looked like Apollo, looked like the god Apollo. So there was a continuity with the past, and then there was, Christianity, because his mother had been to Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem she had found the nails that had been used for the crucifixion of Jesus. And those nails were put into the head of this statue of Constantine. So there are other things too, that both for continuity and so on. But let's just say that Constantine had a conversion to Jesus, but he had absolutely no understanding of the kind of authority the Jesus of the New Testament wields. I think we can say that categorically, that they are on completely different pages in that respect. Now, a couple of other things here just to constitute how do you constitute unaccountable authority? Well, you also do it in part by having hierarchy. And this quotation here is from Ignatius of Antioch, who wrote a letter to the Smyrnians. He wrote several letters, and he's a very early Christian person. Christian leader in the city of Antioch, which was of course very central in the book of Acts. And here is what he is saying, so now you can interpret it after we've read it. No one is to do anything with reference to the church without the bishop. That Eucharist is to be considered valid, which is celebrated by the bishop or by a person he permits to celebrate. Wherever the bishop appears, there the assembly is to be. Apart from the bishop, it is not lawful to baptize or to hold the sacred meal. What do you hear him say? Well, you're seeing a figure of authority emerge in the church. It's quite interesting to see that it emerges in Antioch, because Antioch is thought to be the church where the Gospel of Matthew is situated. You know, when scholars try to locate these Gospels in various church communities, they generally tend to locate Matthew in Antioch. And Matthew says what about authority? Matthew is very big on that subject. You should not call anyone rabbi. You should not call anyone master, because you have one master and you are all brothers. There is an explicit non-hierarchical construct of authority in the Gospel of Matthew. And here in Antioch we hear, not long after the Gospel of Matthew has been written, we hear Ignatius of Antioch saying, in this church we have hierarchy, and you can only do things when it's authorized by the bishop. And in some ways, the bishop by himself becomes the embodiment of church. You know, you see the bishop, there is the church. You see that? You see the emergence of hierarchy, and this is long before Constantine. This is 200 years before Constantine. So already within churches, within communities in the church, you are seeing the emergence of the old notion, the Old Testament notion of priesthood, where you have that kind of structure in the Old Testament. But Jesus seems to throw it open, doesn't he? In the Gospel of John, he seems to throw it open when he sort of empowers everybody. So the Protestant notion of the priesthood of all believers is a biblical notion. It is well established in the New Testament. So this girl on the left there is my daughter. I put in another picture in your handout, but then I looked for this one, and the hand you see on her shoulder is my hand. So I have edited the picture very, very, what should I say, sensitive to you. So you didn't, but you can see my head just barely in the corner there. The shape of unaccountable authority. We could probably do more than I am doing here, and then I will explain why I put my daughter Lynn into the picture in a moment. But first you have a legacy, you have a historical legacy in the Roman Empire. You have an imperial legacy and an imperial mindset. And an imperator is a ruler who is answerable to none. See, there is not accountability. It is structured as, which way isn't there accountability? So here you have the top, and here you have the bottom. And who is accountable to whom? Where does accountability go? Well, so there is no, you are accountable to the emperor. The emperor is not accountable to you. That is the way the authority is structured. That is the way the imperial system has worked. Then, number two, you also have, as a shape of unaccountable authority, a hierarchical structure. Just so we know what we're trying to say here, that these people, the people at the bottom, they have not much say over what happens at the top. You see that? There is imperial, which is constitutionally unaccountable, and there is hierarchy, which means that yes, there might be other sort of there might be other levels here, but the bottom has not very much influence of what happens at the top. Now, the Adventist Church, is the Adventist Church hierarchical, or is it non-hierarchical? Well, this sounded like Babylon to me. That was let's do both. Let's do on paper. Is it hierarchical on paper?
Not really.
Well, almost. So, what would you say? Is it hierarchical on paper too? In its constitution? My hunch, my view has been that the Adventist Church is on paper has accountable authority about up to the union level, and above the union level even on paper it is very hard to see accountability there. So then even on paper it tends more and more toward being a hierarchical structure. In practice, I'm not going to disagree with anyone who says that in practice it tends to be hierarchical and quite unaccountable. But let's not say that too loud. On the conference level, I would say there is you can change things on the conference level. I have been wondering how some division presidents get reelected. In areas that I am aware of. I just don't understand how they get reelected. I don't think they should have been, but they do get reelected, and it seems to me that must be because the mechanisms for accountability aren't very good. But we could easily get bogged down in this topic. So let's just do the other 3 or 4 points I have here. Fraternity. Authority, the shape of an accountable authority as fraternity. I would say that the Roman Catholic Church is particularly vulnerable on that one, because you have a male-only fraternity, and you have celibacy too, which in some ways reinforces the problem, because it makes you more vulnerable, socially vulnerable. I'm not talking about living as a single person. I'm talking about celibacy as policy, that there is that you are structured in a certain way that a fraternity will tend to be closed. It will tend to be sequestered from the rest of society. Patronage, what is that again? We said it last time, but we need to do it again. So you do a favor for me, and you can count on me to vote your way. The power structure, it's not like there is only one person here. There are more persons. This is the bottom again. There is a group of people here, but they are kind of internally, sort of rotating among themselves. So you might the person here appoints some of the people just below him. I mentioned Syria as a case in point, what is going on in Syria today, because there is a minority group in Syria that wields power, but it needs a power base that is somewhat beyond its own narrow sort of sect. So you give privileges to some people in this system, and they in turn reward you by keeping you in good shape. That is what patronage is. And patronage does not include the people on the bottom. It is a power structure that excludes the ones on the bottom. And then you might also have the notion of infallibility. Well, what's the point of putting my daughter into this? Because she would be against all of them. The point is that my daughter, Lynn, she did her PhD at Yale University in theology, and she wrote on Trinitarian theology. And I thought at first, this is going, oh my, why would you do this to yourself? This is not going to strike any sort of contemporary relevant issue. She critiqued the Trinitarian theologies of the two leading Trinitarians in our time, a Roman Catholic by the name of Hans Urs von Balthasar, and a Protestant by the name of Wolfhard Pannenberg, a German. Both of them are in a German context. One is a Catholic, one is a Protestant. And the two things that she did was to take, looking at the Trinity, she says that there is a bias in both of these Trinitarian theologies, that they both think about, they think of the Godhead as hierarchical. So who is in charge? The Father. And the Son and the Spirit, they are under the Father. So, there are various ways, and the terminology of this is daunting. So let's not get into the specific terminology. But there is a hierarchical structure within the Trinity. The Father is on top. That's how reality is constituted up to God. And then the other part of it is that what sort of gender is God? God is a man. God is male. So my daughter's critique, and I am quite awed by what she has done, because she took on these leading people. Her critique is to say that there is a non-hierarchical reality in the Trinity. The divine reality is not that sort of authority where you have the Father and the Son and the Spirit, but you have the Father and the Son and the Spirit in a non-hierarchical relationship to each other. How about that? And then what is the gender? Well, God is not a man. Is God a man? Is he male? Male and female he created them. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. So God in his own. So at least you need to attenuate somewhat the maleness of God. So, God, because God has everything, all human reality that you can see, male and female, must in some ways, be a reflection of what God is. So, again, why are Adventists squirming so much about, women in ministry and other things? Well, partly is because our theology, right down to what God, who and what God is, seems to be indebted, seems to bear the imprint of these things. So anyway, if she comes to visit once, I'll try to make her share some of her thoughts with us, because she can do it very well. In the church, then, the structure of unaccountable authority, such as this one, this is Pope Gregory VII, who is kind of a go-to person, because you cannot fault him for not saying what he means very clearly. What is he saying? Don't read these other ones when you have time, because they all have something to do with unaccountability. But how about this one? That he himself may be judged by no one. Is that accountability, or is it unaccountability? Is that a declaration of saying, sort of structuring yourself as unaccountable authority, that he himself can be judged by no one? Well, who does he think will judge him? Well, God, so he thinks there is accountability to God. But accountability, the notion of no accountability here, that he himself may be judged by no one, and the notion of infallibility, they travel together. They are usually traveling on the same bus or in the same wagon on the train, because this is the claim of that the Roman Church has never erred, nor will it err to all eternity, the Scripture bearing witness. Well, accountability is not exactly the high on that list. The Inquisition in the 13th century, and in the Spanish Inquisition in the 15th century, comment on this? Anyone? Now that I have spoken for a while, let me hear some comments on this statement. Let's read it. Inverse an impossible burden of proof, and that the Inquisition did not allow defendants to confront or often even to know the names of their accusers. I've taken this from what's his first name? Norman Cantor. Norman Cantor is an American medievalist. He has written many books, and this one is from his book, The Civilization of the Middle Ages. And he is, to my liking, offensively lenient on the Inquisition. I think he is way, way too lenient. You know what? Why is he not seeing that this is much worse than he is making it out to be? But I decided, well, let him speak. Let him just say at least one thing here. The Inquisition did not allow defendants to confront or even to know the names of their accusers. It happens again in the French Revolution. It happens again in the Holocaust. And it happens to some extent in various policies of detention today, secret detentions today. And what sort of burden of proof do you have in this kind of system? What is an inverse burden of proof? You have to prove yourself innocent. And now in the right sort of relationship there, you have the presumption of innocence until proven guilty, don't you? And here, can you prove yourself innocent? It's not easy to prove. Sort of positive proof like that is not easy to do. And it is an impossible burden of proof because you are accused, and then if you do not admit to the crime for which you are accused, what will they do to you? They will torture you, and when they have tortured you for a while, you will admit it. So that's an impossible burden of proof. That is really quite cruel, isn't it? To have that. So we're seeing again a sort of authority aspect here that is not very attractive. High tide of arbitrary authority. I'll give you the reference for this, but this I hope you can make out what is going on here. This man is tied to a ladder of sorts, and they are pouring water into his mouth. This is the Spanish Inquisition. When the rack did not produce the desired result, the rack was what we saw in the previous slide. That's the rack. When the rack did not produce the desired result, the churchman turned to the water torture. I said in another audience here that they had an idea about hydrotherapy in those days. That was of a different kind, but it was intended to cure certain things in these people. In this hideous remedy, the prisoner was tied to a ladder that was sloped downward so that the head was lower than the feet. The head was held fast in position by a metal band. The mouth was forced open with a metal piece and a cloth placed over the mouth. Then a pitcher of water was brought, and water poured over the cloth, with each swallow the cloth was drawn deeper into the throat until in gagging and choking the victim nearly asphyxiated. The terror of suffocation was extreme, and the process was repeated endlessly, bloating the body grotesquely until the victim was ready to confess. James Reston Jr. is the author of this book. James Reston Sr. used to be a very respected columnist in the New York Times. I have not followed the career of his son. I think this must be his son. Dogs of God. This is a book that I think is a good book. It's a trustworthy. That is the Spanish Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition was the inventor of what is now called waterboarding. And this is another type of hydrotherapy where you just do it by putting them under water till they think they will die. What's the point? Well, you see again when you read in this book that some of the primary victims of this type of investigation during the Middle Ages were the Jews, because the Jews were always under pressure to convert. So they wanted the Jews to convert, and they often put them under severe political pressure or, even torture. But then they thought that the Jews had not been sincere in their conversion. So you had converted, but maybe you weren't sincere. Maybe you still lit a candle for Sabbath, suspicions like that. So you put these people under torture and made them admit that they had been converted insincerely. Well, how can you get yourself out of that kind of predicament? Because you did convert. But then they said, well, that wasn't good enough. Maybe you converted insincerely. And then they torture you. So what are you going to do under torture except to say that you admit that the authority has all the cards and you have absolutely no cards to play in this kind of a structure? I am suggesting here, and you will not be surprised by this, that there has been a reacceptance of unaccountable authority in our time. And I'm asking here, I don't mean to be sort of what do you call that? Sort of irreverent, but I will say it in respectfully. Did the U.S. and the U.S. president understand that he was talking to a power constitutionally opposed to the separation of church and state? What do I mean? Is that true? Is it true to say that the Roman Catholic Church is opposed to the separation of church and state?
Absolutely.
Well, it is and it isn't. It is and it isn't. Because there are many leading, constitutional thinkers in the Catholic Church in the U.S. that are fully, and I say believably, in agreement with the separation of of church and state in the U.S. But the Pope, the person to whom President Reagan is talking here, he has constituted his own state. The reality of non-separation here goes to the heart of the matter, that the church is a state. See, so there is incoherence. There is definitely, especially post-Vatican II, there is definitely leading Roman Catholics saying, we believe in freedom of religion. We believe in separation of church and state. And I think they mean it credibly. But it seems to me that they have not seen that their own reality, their own church reality, is that the church is constituted as a state. And my hunch is that he doesn't see it either, that he just doesn't relate to the person to whom he is speaking as someone who in a profound way, does not share his American values. Did the U.S. president understand that the partner in conversation was and is committed to unaccountable authority? I think that is a fair question, because I think that is true, that the Roman Catholic Church is not committed to accountable authority. It really cannot be, because it has in its own history sort of produced or advocated the ideology of unaccountability. I would like to read a couple of statements here. I was present when Jose Maria Escrivá, when he was beatified in the 90s. I was in Florence, and I just saw that there were posters all over Florence that he was going to be beatified. He is the founder of the Catholic group Opus Dei. Opus Dei is many Adventists who are critical of the Catholic Church, they say, well, there is a lot, Jesuits and so on. But the Jesuits are not very loyal to the hierarchy of the Catholic Church today. The Jesuits are in some ways the liberals of Catholicism. Opus Dei are the conservatives. Oh, this is the founder, Spanish cleric who founded Opus Dei. And here is a couple of statements from Opus Dei. Obey as an instrument obeys in the hands of an artist, not stopping to consider the reasons for what it is doing, being sure that you will never be directed to do anything that is not good for the glory of God. Read the other statements that I have put in there in your handout. This person was canonized in 2002. he was first beatified, canonized, very shortly after his life, showing to me the kind of ideal. What is the ideal that the church wishes to promote in terms of authority? And you could ask the same question within Adventism. What sort of winds are blowing? What is the ideal that we would like to have in our church when it comes to accountability? So I will have to skip that. And then I'll just mention the sex scandals. The sex scandals in the Catholic Church are atrocious, of course. It's a very, very, very serious and a very sad problem. But it is a problem that is very much related to lack of accountability, lack of transparency, lack of access, that the church meant to handle these things internally. The church meant to handle it pastorally. They did not want to go to the police, because if you report your priest to the police, what then? Then you are saying, I am accountable to another authority than myself. You see, then you are sort of violating the notion of unaccountable authority. And it has been quite humiliating for the Catholic Church to discover that society intends to hold the church accountable and has no plans of accepting that you handle this personal. This person here, who is blessed by the Pope in 2004, is the founder of the Legionaries of Christ, which is another, in some ways, another rightist group within modern Catholicism, idealized by the Vatican, just like Opus Dei is idealized by the Vatican for their commitment to hierarchical structures, submission on the part of the members, unaccountable authority, and you name it. So I could have said more about it. It's quite a tedious subject. I want to read this before we end. I'm sorry I'm not getting to one of the points I would have liked to make today, but you can, maybe we'll have a chance to talk about it at some other time. Frank McCourt, when I look back on my childhood, I wondered how I survived it all. It was, of course, a miserable childhood. The happy childhood is hardly worth your while. Worse than the ordinary miserable childhood is the miserable Irish childhood, and worse yet is the miserable Irish Catholic childhood. The poverty, the shiftless, loquacious, alcoholic father, the pious, defeated mother, moaning by the fire, pompous priests, bullying schoolmasters, the English and the terrible things they did to us, and so on. I don't think he means it, in a joking way. There are terrible childhoods. There are terrible religious childhoods, terrible childhoods, authoritarian childhoods. I think some of us as Adventists have also experienced our share of less than perfect childhoods. My father was a person who did not understand accountable authority or wield it in a meaningful way. So let's just end by saying that the Jesus of the New Testament, the God of the Bible, believes in accountability, has in some ways opened his whole project up to us, and whatever confidence we have in it will be a confidence that can be based on God's commitment to wield only accountable authority.